I will let him introduce himself because I only know the first three from what little bit Dave has told me. But do you know about BlueStamp?
Actually, just what Dave has told me. So why don't we start there? That's maybe even a better place.
Yeah. So the students are all building different projects. Everyone's building something different in here. We're about halfway through as of Tuesday. And so they're doing their own website and going to finish their project by July 21st and then either continue what they're doing, start a different project, and then hopefully use their website to help get cool jobs, get into college, not do something boring with their lives, do something awesome.
College rocks.
Yeah. Yeah, college rocks. I don't know, I think after college is better.
Then you have to do all this other crazy stuff like buy a house, which is what we just did, and it's been pure insanity. So, cool. So I apologize. In the chaos of buying a house, I left and misplaced the sensors and bridges that we make. So Notion is, I guess, at a high level. Anyone ever hear of like the Nest smart thermostat?
Oh, I have one.
Okay. Or Dropcam, or there are a bunch of other companies that all do the same thing. So we play in that space. We play in the kind of Internet of Things, connected home area. So what we do is we make a small sensor that's about the size of an Oreo, is I think a good way to kind of picture it. And actually inside of that sensor, we have 7 actual sensing components. And so with one sensor, we can tell you things like if a door opens or closes. We can tell you the temperature in a room. We can tell you if you leave your lights on when you leave for the day. We can tell you if the smoke alarm goes off. We can do water leaks. We can even tell you like how much propane is left in the tank for your grill. And we do that through a bunch of different ways. We collect a lot of data and do a lot of data processing. Like I said earlier, we're located just around the corner. There's 11 of us in the company. We just hired our 11th like 2 weeks ago. And the company's been around for about 2 years. Last summer, at about this time, 4 of us went through the Techstars accelerator out in Boulder. Anyone heard of Techstars? Has everybody heard of Techstars? So for anyone who hasn't, Techstars is the top, and this is their marketing spiel. This isn't me plugging us having gotten in. They're the top startup accelerator in the world. So of the 1,500 applicants that apply every year, only 12 or 13 companies get accepted. So 4 of us went through that program last year. It's a 3-month program where you're sort of expected to do 6 or 12 months of work in 3 months, and they set you up with a bunch of mentors and advisors. They give you a little bit of money, and at the end you have this big presentation called Demo Day where they get a bunch of rich people, a bunch of investors, to come out and sit in the Boulder Theater, and all 12 or 13 companies pitch their company and say, like, we're looking for money to do these things, and then you raise money. So aside from like building a thing, there's all these like crazy businessy type of things like raising money and hiring people and finding office space and all those other things that you don't really think about. But prior to Notion, I worked for a company here in town called Deloitte, who had prior acquired a company called Ubermind, which was a digital agency. So what we did is companies like Kaiser Permanente or Target or Aetna, a lot of healthcare and a lot of retail companies would come to us and say, hey, we want a website or we want a mobile app to do X, Y, and Z. So if, well, I guess all of you guys are too young to have your own health insurance, but if you've ever shopped at Target and used their iPhone or their iPad applications, or their website for that matter, the company that I worked for built all of those products. And before that, I lived in Atlanta and worked for IBM and doing a lot of the same stuff, but for tennis and golf. So if you follow the Masters or Wimbledon, US Open golf and tennis, I built all of those mobile applications for 2012-2013, which the Masters had 3.5 million downloads, a lot of people using those applications, obviously. So a lot of fun stuff there. And prior to that, I went to Georgia Tech in Atlanta, downtown, and got my bachelor's in industrial and systems engineering, which is a fancy way of saying that we did a lot of work on like supply chains. So how you would order something from Amazon, how does Amazon get it to your front door at as low of a cost as possible and as quickly as possible? I worked on solving a lot of those kinds of problems. And before Georgia Tech, I was a music major. So I didn't really start in engineering. I kind of fell into engineering as a byproduct of playing a lot of music and kind of wanting to do something different. And that's sort of where that ended up. So that's a reverse chronological story of my life, at least up until college to now. Any questions so far about any of that?
What type of music?
So I was a percussion performance major, so I was mostly just playing drum set. A lot of jazz and some other stuff, but also a lot of ethnic drumming, Latin fusion, and stuff like that. I have no idea what I would have done with that. Honestly, my parents sort of forced me to go to college. As a music major, I kind of just wanted to play music. And they were like, you have to go to school, and so I ended up going to engineering school. Georgia Tech's industrial engineering program is the top undergraduate program in the country, so it ended up turning out pretty well. But yeah, that's the kind of music I was playing.
What was the switch though? Like what kind of flipped the switch, or was it gradual? Like, go back some years and like tell us what happened.
Yeah, so
Probably really good, and then like switch.
Yeah, you know, honestly, I think, and this is maybe a little bit of a cliche, but you kind of want to make your job something that you love. I am very fortunate in that. Oh, I'm sorry. I lead all of the software development at Notion. I forgot to mention that. So we have obviously a hardware component and then a ton of software. I lead all of the software engineering that happens there. I'm fortunate in that I get to go to work every day at a very small company with a small number of people, and we all are super, super passionate about what we do, to the point where when we were going through Techstars and a lot of us were working 90 hours a week or more, it doesn't really feel like work. And when I was going through school for music, I had that same passion for music, but going to school for it didn't really align with that. So I decided that I'd rather continue to play music because I enjoy playing music and not because someone was telling me that I had to sit in a room by myself and play for 6 or 10 hours a day. And looked for other things that were interesting to me, and math and science was always something that I wasn't necessarily super interested in school, but happened to do decent math. And looked around at some other colleges. So I didn't start at Georgia Tech. They don't have a music program. They're strictly an engineering school. They have some management in other colleges, but mostly like 80% of their student body is engineering. Checked out a couple of programs and had some friends that I went to high school with that were in a lot of the like AP classes that I was in, and taking a lot of honors and like SAT courses and all that other stuff that I was doing, and they were all going to Georgia Tech for engineering. Aerospace engineering, mechanical engineering, biomedical engineering are all top programs at the school there, so a lot of the kids that I went to high school with were going to school for that. And none of that stuff was super interesting to me, but a lot of the industrial engineering stuff was. So actually, my last year of college at Georgia Tech, and a lot of colleges are like this, you have to do like some big capstone project or a senior design project or something like that. And I worked on a team. We consulted for the World Food Program, which is based in Rome. So I actually got to go out to Rome, Italy for a week. And we built a software tool to help them figure out how to send food through Eastern Africa. So all these food donations come in from all these ports all over the world. They're shipped on these big shipping containers from Canada and the United States and Japan and South America and all these places around the world. And they all have to end up at some ports. There's like 4 or 5 ports on the eastern coast of Africa. They have to get unloaded from those ports and then sent through vans and trucks and carts and all these other land transportation mediums to towns and villages that are in desperate need of this food. So what we did is we built a software tool that helped the World Food Program figure out which ports they should send food to get it to its destination the fastest and the cheapest. Because it's a nonprofit, you obviously want to save money when you're not making money. And it's an interesting problem because you think about, like, you order something on Amazon and it flies out from, like, China probably, where it's manufactured, and comes to the United States, and then it gets on a truck, and then someone, like, drives it to a distribution center, and then from a distribution center it gets put on another truck and then goes to your house. And those are hard problems, but what we were dealing with is, like, political unrest. So what happens if one tribe decides to start war with another tribe in Eastern Africa? How do we route food around those war zones such that food can still get to the people who need it? Monsoon season is a huge deal out there because not a large number of their roads are paved. So what happens when the most direct route from the port to a village gets completely washed out from feet of rain? And so those are like really interesting problems. And those were the kinds of problems that brought me kind of into engineering and into industrial engineering in general. Yeah, so that's sort of the switch and why I went from engineering. I never really thought I was going to go to engineering school. I didn't actually take any math or science AP classes because I was like, I'm just going to play music. Like, I don't need to know calculus, and I don't need to worry about differential equations or physics and all these other things, and then I ended up doing it all anyways. So it's interesting that your priorities will change, and I think that don't think that what you want to do today is necessarily what you're going to want to do for the rest of your life, because I got my degree in industrial engineering and went to IBM as a consultant doing like very boring consulting work for large companies, and was on the road 4 days a week, kind of like the traditional consultant road warrior type of thing, where I was in a hotel room 4 days a week, and then I'd come home Friday night and fly out again Monday morning, and I was doing that every week. And one day was I had a friend who I went to college with who got a great job at Apple, and I was like, yeah, like building iOS apps seems pretty cool. So I bought a book, and I had a lot of free time in the hotel room by myself, taught myself how to build some apps, and then it turned out that the team that was building a lot of the tennis and golf apps for IBM needed some help, and they honestly gave me a chance. They took a gamble on me, having not had any like on-the-job experience building apps before, and worked out for both parties. But it definitely worked out for me. So there's an equal combination of hard work and a little bit of people having faith. Any other questions? Any questions about like engineering or building a company or starting your own business? Or I did consulting work for a long, like freelance work for a long time, building apps and websites and stuff like that, which sounds like kind of some of the stuff that you guys are doing. I see voltmeters and other electronic-y things around. So you can answer some questions about that. Or I can just stand up here for a couple more minutes.
You guys don't have any questions? I have like 4, but I'll wait.
So did you were you one of the original members of Passion?
Yeah, so the story is there's 2 co-founders, 2 friends from like when they were like 5 years old. The Colorado natives they both went to CU. One of them was in the middle of the night, their smoke alarm like just randomly went off for no really good reason, and he was like, wow, you know, they have a dog. He was like, what would happen if my smoke alarm went off and we weren't home and it was an actual emergency? Like, how would I know that I needed to come home and rescue the dog? And so they started sort of thinking about, well, what if we put something what if we made a smoke detector that would send you an email or a phone call when it was going off? And it turns out that building products that are responsible for saving people's lives, there's a lot of red tape, right? There's a lot of regulatory things, and it's not easy. So the next idea was, well, why don't we just put something next to the smoke alarm that'll do the same thing, but we don't actually have to like make the smoke alarm. And it turns out that sensors are cheap. Hardware is getting much less expensive, and so it allows companies like us to build and prototype pretty quickly and for not a lot of money. And so after they were like, oh, okay, well, yeah, we can do sound, but like temperatures, that's easy, right? You just put a temperature sensor in there and it gives you temperature. Fine. Well, why can't we put an accelerometer in it and figure out like if a door opens? Okay, well, why can't we put a light sensor and tell you if your lights are on? And so it sort of snowballed into this like, well, we can actually put a bunch of sensors in this thing and get a bunch of data out of it. And how much easier is that than asking someone to buy a door sensor and a smoke alarm sensor and all these like single use case devices, right? How much cheaper is it? How much easier is it? And at the end of the day, building something is hard, and building a website or building a mobile application or building a sensor is difficult, but making something that other people can use is astronomically more difficult. And that's the real challenge, I think, because we have a lot of smart people that work at Notion. And so after the two co-founders sort of prototyped this thing a little bit, they brought on our head of hardware, Sean, who actually lives in Hawaii. He lives on the side of a volcano in Hawaii, actually. And so when he was out here for Techstars, it's during like July through October is like hurricane season out there. So he was like, I might have to fly back to Hawaii on a moment's notice because I'm part of the amateur radio emergency response team, because he lives in such a remote part of Hawaii that they like cell service is very spotty. So they rely on these like amateur radios to relay messages about evacuation routes and things like that. So it's like a little strange, but yeah, it's cool. He was actually just in town a couple weeks ago. So so they brought on Sean to kind of build a little bit more of the hardware and smaller and design the board and write a lot of the firmware. And then once they found out that they could actually like make this thing, they decided that like you needed an app and you needed a server and you needed a website and you needed to do data processing and store all this data and all these other things. So that's where I came in. And we applied to Techstars, and it's a long process. There's a bunch of interviews and they ask you a bunch of questions. And so yeah, so there's kind of four of us at the core. And then once we got to a point where we were picking up a lot of traction, we ran a Kickstarter campaign, which was cool. If anyone's ever like backed anything on Kickstarter, we did that. So we ran the campaign, and the campaign did really well. We were actually in the top 0.5% of all hardware projects on Kickstarter ever in terms of our success. We funded the whole campaign in like 22 hours, 23 hours. And so as we started getting press and we did the Kickstarter thing, we needed more people, so we brought more people on. So now we have 3 software engineers, 2 hardware engineers, 2 folks in marketing, 1 designer, and the two co-founders. I think that brings us to 11. Anyone want to check on that? I think we're 11. So yeah, so that's sort of it. So the 4 of us is kind of the core team.
How often are you involved on the business side of your company?
A good amount, actually. Up front, when there was only 4 of us, you know, everybody makes a decision. Everybody opines. Everyone has an opinion about everything, right? And it's not hard to manage 4 people's opinions about like how much do we charge for this thing and what other things can. Because at the end of the day, like investors, they're going to give you money for a piece of your company, but they want to know that if they give you $10,000, they're going to get like $100,000 back, right? If they gave you $10,000 and got $10,000, then no one would be an investor. So a lot of the decisions around like how can we monetize our product and what like new features can we offer and what features do we offer for free and what do we build now versus what do we release over time, those are all decisions that all 4 of us were involved in early on. As we grew, it gets harder and harder to manage 5 people's opinions and then 7 people's opinions and now 11 people's opinions, and hopefully by the end of the year we'll be at about 25 or 30 people. It's impossible to manage that many people's opinions. So anything that's like touches software, any of the strategy around that, new software products, new apps. So we have an iOS app, we have an Android app, we'll have a web app. Do we do tablet? Do we do watch? Do we do some other new pieces? Do we do like the Oculus Rift virtual reality thing? Like I get to kind of put my 2 cents into a lot of that stuff and figure out the strategy around that, which is really cool. It's cool to like build something, and then it's cool to figure out how to like bring it to everybody else. So all of us have a system in our home, and we're getting alerts when the door opens, and if it gets too hot or too cold, and all these other things. But when you see, like, we just got our final version of our packaging, so we're launching into Lowe's in September. So we, had to make packaging. That's like a thing. Like it's a huge process where you have to get design. You've got to figure out, all the certifications and what certifications you have to have on there. We had to get FCC certification to make sure that our bridge wasn't going to like explode or knock down all the Wi-Fi in a hospital or something like that, right? So figuring out how you put all that stuff on there, those are all additional challenges that you don't think about when you're just like, oh, I'd like to make a sensor. So it's cool. The business part of it is just as interesting as the technology part of it, if not more, because it's new for me, right? I've done technology for a really long time. I've built apps, I've built websites, I've built technology products that have millions of users before, but the business part of it is really, really interesting.
So in terms of like college and especially engineering, I've heard a lot about how like different majors in engineering are becoming, like some of them are becoming more viable nowadays, and some are becoming less viable. And there's, for example, like what I've been told about mechanical engineering, there's four people with majors in it for every one job in it. And so it's becoming oversaturated. And then there's other, for example, electrical engineering, there's, I think I've heard there's 2 jobs for every 1 person, something like that. So it's like less and less and more depending on which engineering there is. So like, so do you think that like thinking about that kind of thing should stop you or should change what you do at all or not?
I'm going to say no. And the reason I'm going to say no is because so as an industrial engineer, I took like a couple of courses on programming, but not a ton. The focus was really on, because most industrial engineers go into consulting, so they'll work in like distribution centers, helping to design manufacturing flows. Like what route a picker, like a fork truck, takes in a factory is a thing that people spend their entire career trying to make better. Which is awesome. So it's like, yeah, it's kind of, anyway. I've worked in some very interesting distribution centers before. I had some very cool summer internships. But point being, I never thought that I would be leading software for an Internet of Things company. 1, Internet of Things didn't exist, but that's fine. But 2, the tech industry just kind of ebbs and flows, right? Right now, I will say that it's very, very difficult for us to find good software engineers. It's even harder for us to find really, really good hardware and firmware engineers, because through the 90s, and I'm not that old, but I heard this, I read it in a book once, that in the 90s, during the dot-com bubble, you had like a lot of people going into software, and then even the early 2000s, when you had like Web 2.0, even more people going into software. No one was going into hardware, because hardware is really expensive, it's very slow, it's very risky for investors, right? Like investors, as soon as we could de-risk the hardware with Kickstarter, they were all about giving us money because all we had to focus on was software. But as a result of that, we've had a really, really hard time finding good hardware and firmware engineers. A lot of them are like in their 50s and 60s, and they don't want to work for a startup.
Yeah.
So the way of the world today is such that I think like if you were going to electrical engineering or software or like computer engineering, so ECE, electrical and computer engineering, I think you'd be good for like the next 10-ish years. But that's not to say that the industry won't change. And it's not to say that what you go to school for is necessarily what you're going to do with the rest of your life. I did not, right? Like I don't do anything that I really learned in college directly, right? Like I don't do like optimization problems, supply chain logistics, or I was doing like a lot of economic decision analysis around costs and stuff. I don't do any of that. I think at the end of the day, a degree in engineering gives you the skills to be able to solve hard problems, and that's what you need to be successful in a career, right? Even if you get a degree in biomedical engineering and you decide to go do something else, that's fine. It's important to follow your passion though, because regardless of if you end up in a warehouse or a data warehouse, if you don't love what you're doing, then it's not going to matter. So I think that that's really, really important.
Yeah.
Cool. So everybody knows what they want to
Can I ask
do.
a question?
Yeah, please.
If you were 16 or 17 or 15 or 18, what would have been helpful for you to hear? Or nothing, because you're a teenager.
Yeah, probably nothing. No.
Me too. We'll just do this.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I don't know. It's a good question. I was fortunate that my parents, like whatever I said that I loved, they were like, yeah, go do that.
Oh, mine too.
And so like when I was like, yeah, I just want to play music, they were like, yeah, go do that. We'll go to all your shows. and so like I think it's important that like whatever you're into, again, it's going to change. It's fine. You could think that you know what you want to do. You probably don't. Maybe you do. I don't know. Some people like meet someone at 16 and they get married and they live together forever. Whatever. It's fine. Those things happen. I think that having the ability to like follow what you're passionate about and doing that with everything that you've got is very, very important. So if you're into philosophy and you want to go be a philosophy major, then cool, go do it. Probably not a lot of philosophy jobs out there right now. But our first software hire, that wasn't me, so our like second software hire, her degree is in like linguistics or something, so like languages, and she went to school and then like studied a semester or a year or something like that at a college in England, and like not a very strong, like not a traditional computer science background. I also don't have a traditional computer science background, but her the way that she's able to think about how we write software and how other people should be able to interact with our software is very related to language. And so I think that like at the end of the day, as long as you follow the things that are interesting to you, you'll be able to figure out a way to apply it to other things that interest you later on in life. It's just important to try a bunch of stuff and figure it out and just go from there.
I'm reading this book on how to write a memoir. It's on YouTube. It will be published someday. And one of the best suggestions from other writers is called Following the Heat. And it means just like following the storyline. So whatever you're most excited about writing, write it. And then it'll come back later. And it's so the same with your career. Dave, who runs this company, he's one of the only people I've ever met who's like, I went to school for electrical engineering and I use everything that I learned in my day-to-day life. I've like never met anyone like that.
Yeah, I mean, our head of hardware is like that, right? He went to School of Mines for electrical engineering.
Yeah.
And obviously does a lot of stuff with electricity as a hardware guy. But yeah, but by no means like you should not feel like you have to choose a major and like you're locked into it forever. There are definitely places around the world where that is true. We are fortunate that it's not true here. So you could go to school for computer science and decide that you want to just teach philosophy. I mean, it doesn't matter, right? Music and engineering are maybe a little more closely related than you would think, but they're very similar in that at the end of the day, music is math, and so you never kind of know where you're going to end up.
Well, your ability to recognize patterns. So that's what I was thinking. Your pattern recognition is probably super strong.
Yeah, and we do a lot of that with data processing. So, yeah. Any other questions? Happy to talk about like the Notion tech, how we do crazy things, what sensors we have.
I have like a last tech question.
Sure.
We'll let the morning kids go. Do you have any controls built into your sensors? So if like a temperature reading, is it connected to the HVAC system in the house, or at this point is it just sensing and then the homeowner knows about something in the house?
Yeah, so we don't have any direct control. We are just a sensor. It's a little battery-powered guy, battery here for about 2 years. But we are part of the Works with Nest program. So if you have a Nest, we can like control your Nest thermostat as a result of temperature readings that we get. One of the things that we're looking at, we also have an if channel, and if this then that. Has anyone ever used that before? Okay. So if you haven't, basically what you do is you say, if this thing happens, then do this thing. So like I have one that says, if it's supposed to snow in the mountains tomorrow, send me an email so that I can pack up my car and take a day off work. And so we have a lot of those also built in. So like, if we detect a window breaking, we can turn all of your lights red in your house, or send you an email, or tweet it so that all of your followers know about it. I don't know. Someone's breaking into my house.
Everybody knows that now.
Yeah.
Join the party.
Yeah. So we're not doing it directly, but we're doing it through integrations.
Your integrations is
Yeah.
interesting.
And those are also interesting because we've built business relationships with these companies. So we have a very good contact, actually through the guy that I knew from college, who was the lead engineer on HomeKit at Apple. And so we went through the whole HomeKit thing and did that. We know the guys at Nest and Google really well, so we kind of did the Works with Nest program. We met with the people from If This Then That. We met with the CEO, the guy that started the whole company, out at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show that a couple of us went to in January, which is nuts. If you ever get the opportunity to go. It's in Vegas, which is maybe not super appealing to you guys. I'm not big on gambling, so it wasn't super appealing to me either. But there are like 30,000 new products introduced in a week at CES, and it's just massive. So it's cool. A lot of drones flying around. A lot of 3D printing. So like they were 3D printing food, which is like really cool. They were 3D printing musical instruments. So there was like a band playing inside one of the convention centers, all on 3D printed drums and guitars and the whole bit. And they had these models, like modeling 3D printed clothes. So cool. The food was like little Pez. So they weren't like printing chocolate cake or anything. Because I would have bought one like immediately. Like, any amount of money I would have paid it if it were to print chocolate cake. But still, like it's a cool concept, right? If you think about the novelty is awesome, but what it could do to change the world in places where it's very hard to get food. If you can just print it, done, right? They have these like huge ones that will print a house.
Oh yeah, I've seen
It
that.
just like rotates around and like the house comes up. We actually have a 3D printer at our office, which I also couldn't bring. It's this big, but there's like this vat of goo.
Yeah.
And then all these mirrors underneath and a UV laser essentially, and it like pulls whatever we're printing out of this vat of goo like Terminator. Super cool. It's not as fast as Terminator because Terminator just kind of like comes up. This thing takes like hours, but if you were to time lapse it, it's very Terminator. And so like we've done all of our enclosures like for the sensors and the bridges and all of that prototyping. We just print it. It's awesome.
Nice.
And they're fairly affordable.
What's the filament for the Pez printer? What's like the stuff?
Like sugar.
I guess, yeah.
It's like sugar water, and it just like hardens. But they were printing it in these like hexagons and like all these like crazy shapes.
Oh, that's cool.
So it wasn't just like a rectangle. There was structure to it. It looked like a molecule.
But you still, I mean, if you had that in like development, you're not going to get anything out of nothing. So the filament, it's not going to like add nutrition. It's going to be 3D.
Yeah, it's the same. You could just drink the filament.
You just melt
Sure.
the filament. With a little spoon.
Yeah, my wife did this thing a couple of years ago. It's not as bad as it sounds, but it's called flavor tripping. And what it is there is a plant that you eat
Yes, I love that plant. It's
that
so weird.
turns sour things into like really sweet
Sweet,
things,
you
right?
can eat anything.
And so you can eat anything. So this is what they were thinking about is like places where it's hard to grow fruits and vegetables, but you've got like a lot of cacti or something like that, which is not nutritionally lacking. Like there's a lot of, it just tastes terrible. You could like eat this first, and then you could just go to town on some plants that you would normally not eat because it tastes awful.
But now it tastes
we
really
should
good.
do
And
that.
now it tastes really good, and you're like
Is
using
that
natural
legal?
resources and all this other stuff. So, but they made this like
Sure.
5 recipe where they gave you like aloe vera plant and like all this other stuff that you would never normally eat. And she's like, yeah, this tastes great.
You can get a custard, anything. It's for a finite amount of time.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah. She said she started sort of like freaking out that maybe she was broken and that it was permanent, but eventually it wears off.
It's a plant that you need, or
It's like, it just changes the sensory.
I would think
You'll be like eating it.
Hey, can I take a picture of you guys?
Yeah.
Our marketing folks love you.
We'll take a picture.
Everybody looked like everything that I said was super interesting. Yeah, I'm so interested. Cool, thanks. Everyone looked interested. Thanks.
We'll take a picture of you looking interested.
I'll look. Yeah, let me look interesting.
Stroke the beard.
Yeah. Someone asked me a really hard question. Let me think about it.
That's a good idea.
Cool. I guess that's it. Unless anyone else has any like last minute questions.
If you are a human, aren't you a donut?
What? Like a really intricate donut? You're right. By the laws of topology, you are a donut. If you assume that everything besides the single hole that goes through you is solid. But since it's not true, you're more than a donut.
Am I missing like a lot of
I
context
feel
or
like
something?
No, it's just the way you said it.
No,
It's kind of
it's
confusing,
like,
but I understand.
it's like a really
Basically, since you have a whole
We have multiple.
Exactly.
Oh.
That's what. So he's like, if you assume that one hole is going to be whole and everything else is solid, then you're a donut.
I don't think anything else is in fairness.
Yeah,
Well,
there's
in
no
your
in and
stomach,
out.
well, I mean, close to
And at least if you do put something through a donut, it comes out in the same form that you
small
put
enough
through
you
it.
can fit through the spaces.
So I'm gonna go with no. We're not actually like a donut. Little extra processing that happens in a human than in a donut.
It's still a donut.
Next question. All right.
Thank you.